What's the living standards framework? We've had the Treasury's mission statement has been that we're about improving the living standards of New Zealanders. And then a few years ago we said, what does that actually mean, improving the living standards of New Zealanders? And out of this discussion came the concept of four capitals: natural, human, social, and financial physical. And in fact, I call those four capitals our economic capital. And there's a good debate to be had about whether I'm using that correctly, which I believe I am. And essentially what we say is that those capitals generate flows that enhance intergenerational well-being. So our focus as policy advisors becomes an intergenerational focus. We're not just about advising government on what the next step should be. We're about advising government on how the next step actually fits into an intergenerational landscape. And ultimately, intergenerational well-being depends on the sustainable growth of those four capitals. Things which I think, just to answer your question, from our experience, is worth talking about right now. And probably the thing we are absolutely focused on at the moment, and in some respects the most important thing, is to have a robust and credible framework of indicators. A robust and credible measurement framework. Because one of the criticisms and critiques we have of the Living Standards framework is that the data aren't reliable, it's all too subjective, it's all too fuzzy. So we've been investing quite a lot of effort, and we've used the OECD's work on the Better Life Index to try and develop. There's been a lot of talk about what is well-being around the world, from Bhutan's happiness stuff to work done in France and the UK at the OECD itself. I think we're a bit further along the road of taking these concepts and saying, let's actually put them into practice.
Yes, I'm a firm believer that what can be measured will be done, or at least we can make an attempt to achieve if we have specific measurements of those objectives. And in that sense, we are obviously way behind on the curve as far as measures of well-being is concerned. So I'm glad you mentioned it really is the next level. Globally, but we've had the human development indices for many years now, decades, through the UN system, and I think countries like India have made an attempt to achieve those indicators because we've sort of committed to certain benchmarks. Even before the Millennium Development Goals became the sort of the gold standard, and then of course subsequently the SDGs. But looking inwards, we are, I think, right now at a point in time when we are having to really rethink our statistical capacity. And yet, this is a country where you had a lot of investment, very robust statistical systems developed since the late 40s and the early 50s. Through Mahalanobis and the Indian Statistical Institute, we've had some of the best survey data systems put in place, whether it was the National Sample Survey, Anglo Survey of Industries, the National Family Health Survey over the last, let's say, 2.5 decades. And Angus Deaton, the Nobel Prize winner in economics, most of his seminal work really emerged out of NSS data from India, consumption surveys and so on and so forth. So we've had data systems in place, but now I think we're getting to a stage when you really need real-time data. You cannot wait 5 years or 10 years to collect data in order to then formulate policies and create indicators. So that's as far as the data is concerned. And of course, remember that This is also a time of big data and digital India, which means we're digitizing a lot of this data on a real-time basis. So it's not really the paucity of data. Right now, I think our bigger constraint is how do you transform data into information? And that really requires analysts, it requires scientists, data scientists, and people who are trained in statistical methods. And I think that is a binding constraint. Because we have a lot of data, and now real-time data, but we have few people across institutions and within the government definitely who can create these indicators and indices. So that's largely putting the context in place. But at the same time, we might, the next budget might be the first budget where we actually do serious gender budgeting. And it's not just gender, it's gender and child budgeting. So there are steps being taken towards that direction. But obviously we are very much in the first order problem solving phase. Now again, towards that, the Niti Aayog has started creating indices for many, many different what we call now measures of well-being. Health and education are definitely, the ease of doing business is the other. And the idea is eventually that if we can properly estimate or create certain ordering, then this is information either to the market or to the policy makers. Competition among states, competition amongst districts will lead to better decision making. So again, these indicators, whether it's ease of doing business, health indicators, now we're trying to rate our public health facilities. So for instance, the district hospitals, and every district in India has, almost all, have a district hospital, but the quality of that varies enormously. So for instance, in the northern part of India, and this is where I think, earlier I would always be critical of people who say, yeah, but India is so large and diverse. We do definitely, the aspiration is to move towards that, but that's South Delhi. If you just compare, the magnitude of the problem and the complexity of the problem, South Delhi is about 5-6 million, Delhi is 20 million. So India, the diversity does play into real-time problems which need to be overcome in order to, in order for these indicators to sort of improve real-time decision-making within the government and also markets actually many times. So a lot of indicators are now being also attempted at the state level. So going back to the district hospital, in the southern part of the country, and I really don't want to, it's not just southern, by the way, it's also Himachal Pradesh and Odisha, because I think it's a false narrative now catching hold that India really is two Indias, and the north versus south. It's not really that. It's the four southern states, Odisha, Himachal Pradesh, Sikkim, Meghalaya. There are many states in the country where across income quintiles, people go to public health facilities because they're good, they're well run, they're well covered. In many parts of the north belt, the Bimari belt, cow belt, you name it, less than 20% go, even amongst the poorer income quintiles. So it tells you that where the facility functioning, it's well governed and it performs, across income quintile, everyone's going to public health facilities when they're good. And no one, not even the poor, are going to the badly run public facilities. Now, what is well run and poorly run really comes out of these hospital level indicators. We're trying to, right now, it's not quality of healthcare. That is again, I think, in another 5 years. Because quality of care is a very nuanced indicator which involves a lot of patient level data. Right now we're just talking about, do you have the health facility? How many X-ray machines are functioning? Does the electricity, how many hours does it come? How far are you from Italicum? Do you have ambulances? Very basic measures, and yet when you put them together in the form of indicators, it is information. So a chief medical officer of one district is in a position to say, look, my facility is much worse and therefore the budget requirement is bigger. So eventually, absolutely right, the idea of all these indicators is to have better well-being, but eventually it's more growth. It's better decision making, better governance, and on the whole it's good for the economy and for the citizens. It's interesting that you mentioned human capital. In fact, I think the part of the reason why I was inducted into the PM's Economic Council is I have been told that I'm the only economist in the last 70 years who's actually focusing on health and education. And it's a pity, but I mean, It's probably the way we have thought of economic policies, essentially from the lens of growth, but we have understood growth only from a very narrow perspective, which has been mostly hard infrastructure driven, public investments, again, into infrastructure and related things, understanding monetary policy or broader fiscal policy. We really haven't gone into understanding the culture of growth. The culture of growth will require smart people, healthy people. So human capital, which sadly in India, we put it into social sector. Social sector in the government is more like a shunting posting. Bureaucrats don't really want to be part of health and education. It also tells you the priority as far as public systems are concerned. And I think there is now an effort, and that's largely my objective as well, to push towards thinking of human capital as now that fundamental constraint, because India's constraint now, having 25 years of sustained growth, isn't really physical capital. We have the money, we've invested a great deal in hard infrastructure. It's very important now that we invest in health and education, and we're seeing some of those steps. And a large part of it has to do with these indicators, because it's very shameful in many ways to see the numbers on stunting and wasting and malnutrition. And again, because we have so many Indians, we have malnutrition where you have acute stunting, and you also have obesity in the urban areas coexisting and actually magnifying in many ways. So, the effort in India is towards transforming a lot of this data into simpler metrics, well understood metrics. The capacity within the government, particularly the Ministry of Statistics, is being enhanced in the census systems, but we are still way behind the curve internationally. So it's great to look at what's happening.